sometimes what the British say and what we actually mean can seem very, very different. And for many English learners, well, that can be pretty confusing. I'm sorry about that. And you can let me know if you've ever found it confusing interacting with a British person. And in the workplace, if we're talking about in the office or in the workplace, well, that can be even more confusing when your British boss speaks to you and they kind of sound like they're asking you for a little favour, when actually they're giving you an instruction. But as much as people say what we say and what we mean is different, the truth is we do say exactly what we mean. We just maybe don't use the words you're expecting us to use. And in this lesson, I'm going to show you 16 common British workplace phrases, and then we're going to talk about what they often actually mean. And right towards the end of this lesson, I'm going to talk about a really important thing, a really important lesson I learned from a British boss while working in a British office. And if you want to learn even more about this fascinating subject, there is a free PDF that you can download to learn even more. And please don't forget to like and hype this video. It really helps other learners to see it as well. But hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to English Right Now. My name is British English teacher Roy. Well, my name is Roy and I'm a British English teacher, so it kind of makes sense. Now, I've been a teacher of English for nearly 16 years, and I've helped thousands of learners just like you understanding things like British English, pronunciation in a modern British RP accent, slang, idioms, the expressions that we really use, and of course, talking about culture. And in this lesson, we're talking about what we say versus what we actually mean. We're really digging into the culture. Before we get started, British people often communicate in quite an indirect manner. We add things like hedging language and softeners. Yes, everybody is different. We're all different. We're all individuals. That's a Monty Python quote. And at times, even though we're all different, most of us do get direct. For example, when we're talking about the workplace, if there's an emergency or a sudden urgent deadline, or when clarity is the priority over anything else, we will get direct. But for many of us, for many British people, the standard everyday interactions with people that we don't know or we're not completely comfortable with, they're not our best friends or our close friends, or even in environments which are less informal, we sort of default to indirect communication. We tend to favour indirect forms of communication. And then when you add that to the workplace with your colleagues, with your bosses, it can be very confusing for second language speakers or people that aren't used to the culture. So very quickly, why do we favour this kind of indirect communication with people we're less familiar with? Well, we need to talk about face. Now, not this face. I've talked about this a lot. The idea of face is this sort of social standing, this idea of social harmony, this social reputation. And we talk about saving face, which often means saving people from embarrassment. Nobody wants to be embarrassed, so we talk about saving face. So maybe I deliberately do something to stop you being embarrassed. So that is me helping you save face. And the opposite of that is losing face, where you do something which causes embarrassment. And British culture in general, we tend to favour negative politeness strategies, which means that we don't like to impose on other people. We don't like to put them in awkward situations. We don't like to sort of back them into a corner. In other words, we like to respect people's autonomy, which sounds like altruism. It sounds like this idea that we're really favouring looking after people's welfare. Like British people are amazing people. But no, it's not that. 9 times out of 10, I would say we don't impose on other people so that we in turn don't seem rude. So it's more a self-protection, even though we're looking like we look like we're protecting you. I look like I'm helping you to avoid embarrassment, but actually, it's more about me. I'm saving myself from embarrassment or saving myself from looking rude, which in turn would cause me to lose face and affect my social standing. So we talk about this. So that's a favoured thing, and that goes across the board from meeting new people, small talk, even in cafes and things like this. And yes, your colleagues at work may also follow these rules, but not just your colleagues. Even your manager, your line manager, your senior managers, they may also follow this indirect form of communication. Like I say, sometimes they will become direct. But the thing is, in a kind of standard, less pressured uh, situation, what could sound like interest from your manager might actually be dismissive, or when they're sort of talking about a minor change, it could actually mean something is pretty majorly wrong. And continuing on about this culture, in a British meeting, if you propose an idea, you say, oh, I think this could be a good idea. Very rarely are they just completely, that's awful, that's terrible. They're not shot down. They're kind of gently sort of put on the back burner. In other words, we'll think about this later. They postpone this idea. Oh, it's a good idea, maybe, but let's talk about some other options. Your idea won't necessarily be said directly as bad. Instead, somebody might say, well, it's quite an interesting idea, but perhaps we could consider alternative approaches or other ideas as well. And what that means is your idea is bad, let's look at alternatives. But we don't say it directly, but we're still telling you that that's not the right idea. And even your managers, instead of saying, I need this, I want this doing, I need this project finished by 5 p.m. on Friday, what you'll actually see is, would it be possible to get this project finished by 5 p.m. on Friday? That would be really, really useful if possible. And it kind of sounds like an option. It kind of sounds like you're doing them a favor, but this is clearly a demand. They are telling you this needs to be done by 5 p.m. and you are expected to pick up on the social cues. Like I say, while we may not use the exact words you're expecting, we are using different words to say the same thing. And yes, if clarity is essential, then probably I will say, I need this done by 5 p.m, please. But to be honest, in most low-pressured situations, most bosses, most managers will default to this kind of indirect communication form because they don't want to seem toxic, or they don't want to look like they're exerting too much pressure on you, even though technically that's what they're doing. And that's just focusing on the culture side of things. We need to talk about the tone. We haven't even factored in tone. I've spoken about why British English could sound passive-aggressive even when it's not, but we need to talk about the tone of using, say, this word, brilliant. Brilliant literally means amazing. It is a brilliant day. I think Lego is brilliant. But the tone of voice could change exactly how this word lands, or exactly how this word is meant to be inferred. So if I say something like, oh, brilliant, it sounds more like surprise. But if I say something like, that's brilliant, it sounds more genuine. With a flatter tone, it's leaning more into irony. Oh, brilliant. Like maybe my car's on fire and I say, oh, brilliant. Could this day get any better? It's leaning into that sense of irony. And of course, there is that passive-aggressive element of British culture as well, that if I say, oh yeah, that's really brilliant, isn't it? You can see the aggression or hear the aggression there. So again, how we say it is sometimes more important than what we say. And I think the golden rule is people normally show interest. They don't necessarily say it. We say, if you show interest, you're asking more questions, you're like making the noises. You don't necessarily say, oh, yeah, cool, that's interesting. But with many of these positive phrases that we're going to talk about, a flat tone indicates that it means something far from what the word actually sounds like. But now let's move on to the 16 words and phrases you might hear in a British workplace and then talk about what they actually mean. And the first one is, that's interesting. You often hear it with that flat tone to mean I don't agree, or I'm not convinced, or quite frankly, it's not interesting at all. I've got a new idea for the project. Oh, that's interesting. Again, people show interest. They don't just necessarily use the word. That's interesting can be very polite disagreement. But again, tone is essential. We'll bear that in mind is not necessarily something you want to hear. Now, if it's quite upbeat, it could be genuine, but what that actually probably means when it's quite flat is this probably isn't happening. It sort of closes the topic without confrontation. So maybe I want to work on a new project and I say, okay, yeah, cool, we'll bear that in mind. It's like me showing consideration with no intention to consider your ideas. But again, as I say, tone is everything. Number 3 is one I absolutely love, with all due respect, sometimes heard as with the greatest respect. This is a warning signal. It usually means something between I completely disagree with you or I think you're a bloody idiot. I think the way I would translate this is I will give you the most respect it is possible to give you. In other words, I don't think you're due much respect at all, but I will try my best. I will reach that limit. So maybe you propose an idea to me and I just say, look, with all due respect, I don't think that's going to work. Perhaps we could is something that managers often say, and it sounds like a suggestion, but it's not. It's often an indirect instruction. So if your manager comes over and says, perhaps we could revise this section, you should revise it. Don't quibble, don't argue, don't say, oh, I don't know, I think it might be. No, they are telling you to revise this section. It is just an indirect instruction. Another alternative to this as a bonus is you might want to. You might want to look at this again. In other words, look at this again. I think the golden rule with these sort of comments, especially when it comes from your manager, listen to the main information. That you might want to, and the perhaps we could, is just basically softeners to get to the real meat of the conversation. You might want to like and hype this video. Next up, if you're in a meeting and you propose an idea, somebody might say, ooh, that might be a bit ambitious. That might be a bit ambitious. And what that usually means is that is unrealistic. It is not going to work. I disagree with that idea. Notice how the criticism is softened. So the next time you hear a British person say, a bit ambitious, you might want to rethink your idea or just understand that they don't agree that it's a great idea, even if it is. Another thing you don't really want to hear is, I'm not sure that's quite right. And that's a really interesting phrase. Not if something is not quite right, it's not right, which means it is wrong. We often avoid bluntness. Often when British people say, I'm not sure, it's usually to soften the blow. But we sometimes say, I'm not sure in front of an opinion when we are 100% confident that what we're saying is correct. One I used to absolutely hate hearing, especially in meetings, is let's circle back to that. Let's circle back to that. So maybe you say something or you talk about an issue or a problem and your manager shuts you down and says, let's circle back to that. And that sounds like, yeah, that's absolutely on the agenda. Let's talk about that later on. And it could be. I mean, because it could mean we're not dealing with that right now, but it possibly means I'm going to avoid that topic. I don't want to talk about it. It's a way of kind of postponing or distracting or putting other things first. This is really common in meetings. Another one that I really, really hate that's very similar to this is let's take this offline. And this basically means let's talk about this away from the meeting. When the meeting is finished, let's talk about this. But fundamentally, it's a way of shutting that person down and stopping them talking. It's sort of saying, this isn't relevant right now, but let's talk about this privately. The reason I don't like it is because it could be a real grievance. It could be a real issue that you have. And basically somebody's saying, stop talking about it right now. But you will hear this one, and I hate it. I'll think about it. It's something maybe your boss might say. And it sounds like I'm going to consider this. But what it probably means or possibly means, especially if it's kind of designed to postpone, it's a politely delayed no. It's a classic British stalling tactic, but I'll think about it will sometimes mean no, especially if delivered with that flat tone. And sometimes instead of I'll, we use the word let's, which almost encourages that sense of collaboration, like we're going to get together and we'll talk about it later. But quite often, your manager or your line manager will never talk about this again. And then you know it was definitely a no. And like I say, in this lesson, there are 16. Well, the thing is, 16 is my lucky number, so I always choose 16. But actually, I've gone above and beyond. So there are more than 16, but there are at least 16 examples of things you might hear in the British workplace. You can let me know any others that you've heard that meant something completely different or that were quite confusing. And please don't forget to like and hype this lesson, as it really does help people to see it. That's one way of looking at it. It's also something you probably don't want to hear. It basically means I strongly disagree, but I'm staying calm. If you suggest an idea and I think it's rubbish, I might go, yeah, that's certainly one way of looking at it. Maybe we could try something else. Another one your boss might say to you is, it would be helpful if. This sounds completely optional. Like, it would be helpful if you did this. It would be helpful if you did that. It would be helpful if you finished this work by 5 o'clock. It sounds like an option. It is not. It basically means, please do this, but they're being polite. It'd be really helpful if you finish this project in the next 5 minutes. Like a lot of these on this list, They can be things that you really don't want to hear, and one of them that I used to dread was, "This might need a few minor changes." It sounds like there's one or two minor things that just need sorting out, but usually this is a way that your boss will pad the fact that there is a serious issue and it possibly needs completely overhauling and redoing. Very rarely will a boss come over and say, "This is awful, you need to redo this." They'll say, "Yeah, you might need to make a few minor changes." Sometimes we say the word tweaks to mean a minor change. It might need a few tweaks. But this phrase is classic corporate understatement. So prepare for the worst if you hear the words, "It might need one or two changes," or some variation of minor changes. Of course, it could be genuine, but it all depends on the tone of voice and what comes next. If they say, "It might need one or two minor changes," or "a quick fix," and then they give you a laundry list of problems that need resolving, you know exactly where that person was coming from. They were just being indirect. "I'm afraid" is something that British people say a lot. It doesn't mean we're scared of everything. In British English, it usually means "I'm sorry," or I don't really want to tell you this, but obviously we're about to. So if you ask for time off and your boss says, "Oh, I'm afraid that won't be possible," it means no. It's like saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, it won't be possible," but they are still saying it's not going to happen. "I'm afraid" softens rejection. "I'm afraid that won't work." Like I often say in these lessons, words like "quite" can be pretty loaded. There's more to it than just the simple literal translation of the word. "That's quite good" often in British English means less than good. So if it's less than good, it's not good. So "quite" can actually modify it down. Be really careful with this word. Of course, intonation is everything. If I say, "Wow, yeah, that's quite good," that sounds more genuine. But if I say, yeah, it's quite good," it's not quite right. Quite good can mean anything from bad to bang average to even good if using the correct intonation. And sometimes even the words "very good" could just mean good. Intensity words like these change everything. Alternatives to "that's quite good" could be "it's nearly there" or "it's almost there." If something is nearly there or almost there, almost finished, almost right, it is not there, it is not finished, and it is not right. Almost, nearly, they bring it down a bit. It's like 90% done, which in turn depends on how much they're softening. It could mean it's nowhere near as well. Similar in that way to "it needs one or two minor tweaks." Another managerial phrase is "I would suggest." I would suggest, it sounds like they're making a suggestion. "I would suggest you look at this again." "I would suggest you make one or two minor tweaks." "I would suggest you check for mistakes." It sounds like a suggestion. It sounds like a casual, friendly hint. But actually what this is do it. Again, it's just padding the real thing. "I would suggest you look at this again." In other words, look at this again. The main information often comes surrounded or after these padding words. And before I give you that really important workplace lesson that I learned in my life, well, let's talk about "as per my previous email." If you receive an email with the words "as per my previous email," this is totally passive aggressive quite often. It usually means you have not answered my previous email, you have not done what I asked you to do, or you've clearly not read what I wrote previously. It's like, here I am saying the same thing again. So maybe you tell somebody the deadline and then they ask you again and you reply, "As per my previous email, this will be completed by 5 p.m. on Friday." It is totally passive aggressive, and I really recommend to avoid sending "as per my previous email" to your boss. But maybe as the client, if you're working with a company and you're getting a bit annoyed, then yes, this signals that I'm losing my patience and I have said this already. So British culture and the British workplace, they often value this kind of indirect language, this indirect criticism. They again value social harmony, not being embarrassed, and face saving. Now, in many, many cultures and many countries, clarity is what gives you professionalism. If you are clear and precise and direct, that is professional. But in the UK, sometimes professionalism is more related to subtlety and being indirect and making sure you don't seem too overbearing. So remember, if you're in the UK and you're working here, listen to the tone, Watch facial expressions, notice repetition, look for the interest rather than listen for the interest, and ask neutral, clarifying questions. And if you don't get that your manager is actually telling you exactly what to do, you could say something like, just to clarify, would you like me to make changes to this? You can always ask questions. No boss or manager should shut you down. Now, workplace communication is only one part of British culture because this indirect style also appears in job interviews, small talk, making friends, humour, dating, social invitations, and even conflict. And that's exactly why I created a course called Decoding British Culture. It goes far beyond grammar and vocabulary. It teaches you what the British say versus what we actually mean. It talks about the do's and don'ts in the UK. British humour explained how to behave in professional settings, how to adapt. If you want to feel confident, not confused, in the UK, you'll find the link below. And if we happen to be running a special promotion when you're watching this, you'll also find the details there. And now for that really important lesson that I learnt. In many, many countries and many cultures, people working late and putting in extra hours is seen as a really, really important thing. It shows willingness and it shows kind of a sense of responsibility and professionalism. And a lot of people, they come to the UK and they put in maybe an hour extra, 2 hours extra. But a manager who became a dear friend once said to me, a lot of managers don't think that working extra hours is a good thing. Obviously, certain situations do require you to put in some extra time, especially if there's an unreasonable external demand. But usually, if you're doing your everyday work, maybe from 9 to 5, and you're ending up staying till 6, most managers will view that as an issue, not a good thing, according to my friend. Rather than think, oh, this person is going the extra mile, they actually think this person isn't capable of doing the job in the time that they should be able to do it in. In other words, it looks like it reflects badly on your time management. They'll worry that you aren't capable of doing the job to the standard that is expected within the time allowed. And of course, sometimes you are given unreasonable expectations, unreasonable tasks. And in that case, you shouldn't suffer in silence. You should let your boss, your manager know. But of course, in a rather indirect way. You should perhaps approach them and say, could I have a quick word, please? And then go on to explain that you feel that you've been given many priorities, and while you will always do your best to hit your targets, some of the deadlines that have been given are quite tight considering the number of tasks that have been given. Open communication in that sense is always a good thing. Remember, don't suffer in silence, but speak to your boss in an indirect way. And always highlight that you will try your best, you will do your best, but also show, subtly, without losing your patience or your temper, show what you feel may be unreasonable. If this lesson helped you, please do like it and hype it. It really supports the channel. And let me know in the comments, what's the most confusing thing a British colleague has ever said to you? Let's decode it together. But thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next lesson.